Has the jury reached a verdict?
We have.
Would the defendant please stand and face the jury?
We, the jury, find the defendant, RaDonda Vaught, guilty of criminally negligent homicide.
When this event happened, there was no changes made until the CMS came in.
I would have never wanted something like this to happen to her.
The Tennessee Board of Nursing's disciplinary processes and judgment of RaDonda Vaught's action during this event are not aligned with the tenets of just culture. Are you familiar with just culture?
Not exactly, no.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. What we're going to talk tonight is about the RaDonda Vaught trial verdict. So in case you were unaware, she was found guilty on 2 counts. We're going to talk about those in a minute. My goal here tonight is kind of to just share what has happened in a very factual way. We're not going to be going down a bunch of rabbit holes of blame games, anything like that. And I want to just highlight the issues that this is bringing into our healthcare system, the precedent that this is kind of setting going forward. Chat with you guys in the comments and see how you guys are feeling about it. As I had posted on there, respectful commentary is perfect. But if anyone is, we're not going to be fighting. We're not going to be calling names, all of that stuff. And I know this case has caused quite the uproar as in the last week. I think it has huge implications for healthcare going forward. I think we can learn a lot from it. I am hoping to, within this conversation, give you some tools that you can use to not only improve the safety in your own practice, like how to protect your own license, but how to advocate in a meaningful way going forward, as well as how to advocate for RaDonda, if that's something that you feel like doing, to kind of let your voice be heard of how you feel about, as a healthcare provider, or just as a, even if you're not a healthcare provider, about this entire situation, because I really do think this is something that is going to harm patients going forward, which is why I've talked about it so much. If you are brand new and you're meeting me for the first time, I'm Liz. I'm a family nurse practitioner. You might want to, if you haven't caught the RaDonda Vaught trial, I'm going to go very briefly over it here. However, it would probably be a good idea to go over and watch the very first video and then maybe come over to this one. This one's a massive spoiler. I again want to thank the nurse Erica for reporting on a lot of this. I will leave her Instagram and TikTok link down below. She did a really good job summarizing this. She was at the trial. And it's been a really interesting week of reflection. I don't know about all of you. You can let me know in the comments, but it's been a lot. There are a lot of of really contradicting opinions. I think this is something that's going to influence patients, influence other healthcare providers, and I know has caused a lot of anxiety and stress for people who are already healthcare providers, as well as those who are in school. So don't worry, we're going to cover things that you can actually do. We're going to run through the case so that we actually have the factual information to run on and kind of come up with some things that can help protect you going forward. So let us start with our very, very basic rundown of the case. So in 2017, a nurse from Vanderbilt named RaDonda Vaught had a medication error. She was supposed to give midazolam, which is Versed. It was a sedative. Instead, she overrode the Omnicell because the medication dispenser, because they were told to by their hospital, because at the time the computer was not talking to the medication dispenser, so they had an order to override the medicine. She typed in VE, and instead of Versed coming up, because she should have typed midazolam, which is the generic, she gave vecuronium, which is a paralytic, and very, very unfortunately, this led to the patient passing away. Like I said, the entire story will be over. It's over in a different video, and there's a lot more nuance to it. The focus of this entire video is an error does not come down to one person. And if we focus, I mean, she made the mistake and she openly admits it. I think that's something that's missed a lot in a lot of the commentary about this is RaDonda has come out openly and said, like, I made a mistake. This was a horrible thing. This is horrible for the family. This is not in any way minimizing what has happened here. She's taken full responsibility. She was honest from the get-go, which is, I mean, all she can really do after what had happened. But the thing why I'm so focusing on this, like I said, is because I think we can make change going forward in the system, and criminally prosecuting nurses will not benefit patient safety, because as we will see as we go through some things, the way that in healthcare we typically find errors and we fix things is by looking at the system. It has not been found by research that going after one person's mistake and charging them and going after them instead of going after the system as a whole, nothing actually happens, because all you're doing is that one individual and you're making everyone else scared, and scared people don't make great choices, right? I mean, I know I don't make good choices when I am necessarily scared. So she went to trial last week, if you're watching this in real time, in March 2022, and she was charged with 2 counts. So let us go and take a look really quick at what those counts were, just so we kind of have a background. Also, she was charged criminally. This is abnormal, because typically in healthcare, if you are getting charged for like a medical error, it is a civil suit. So that means you are not going to go to jail. You are going to pay a fine, and you are going to have maybe your nursing license or your medical license revoked, and you can get charges like penalties put against you, which lead to a fine. She is also undergoing that, and she did have her nursing license removed. She's paying $60,000 in fines, and she has 3 penalties against her. So that is happening also. It is not as common for things to enter the criminal realm, because then we are making an error you make at work on accident. This is all on accident. And this is all out the window if we're talking about like someone who has a pattern of things. We're making that a criminal offense. And that's where we are tiptoeing a scary line of, well, now if people know if they admit their mistake, maybe they won't report it at all because they don't want to go to jail. And that is the really big crux of this whole thing. So let's run through this real quick, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about my thoughts on that. We'll see some of your thoughts, and we'll run through why in medicine it's run the way it is, where we usually blame the system and not just the one person. And it's for a reason. It's not just to say, I've seen a lot on the internet the last week that people are just trying to get her out of something, or that we're defending people making epic errors. And this is not about her. Like, she is kind of the face of a movement that is saying, like, my staffing ratios, this is not safe. What if I make an error? I don't want to go to jail if I make an error too. And it's a slippery slope. So let's start up here. So what were the charges that she was brought on? She was brought on, first, reckless homicide and neglect of an impaired adult. These are, again, both criminal charges, both leading to jail time if she is found guilty. Let's start with reckless homicide. Reckless homicide, which is defined in the state of Tennessee as a crime in which a perpetrator was aware that their act or failure to act when there is a legal duty to act, so being someone's nurse and like it was her legal duty to act, creates significant risk of death or grievous bodily harm in the victim, but ignores the risk and continues to act or fail to act, and a human death results. So this is a more serious charge. So she was charged with this, and they had to decide if she's guilty or not guilty. They decided she was actually not guilty of this. But then they have the choice to continue to go down and say, hey, do we want to leave this as like totally not guilty, or do we want to proceed with a lesser charge? They chose to proceed with a lesser charge, and we go over here, and they chose negligent homicide. Negligent homicide in Tennessee is criminal negligent conduct that results in death. I thought that was not a great explanation. I went on their website. I was like, that's all you have to say about it? It's like literally the definition. So they went and they charged her with a lesser thing, and they did find her guilty of that. And that can lead to 1 to 2 years in prison. She was also charged with neglect of an impaired adult. Again, this one is almost exactly how it sounds: neglect of an individual or harming an individual who is 18 years or older and has a physical or cognitive impairment for whom you are responsible. So in this case, a patient who is in the hospital is going to have an impairment because they are in your care. And with this one, they did find her guilty, and this is 3 to 6 years in prison. So RaDonda has not been sentenced yet. So the way things work in criminal court is you get charged guilty or not guilty, and then usually about a month later, you will have your sentencing. So hers is May 13th, interestingly, Nurses Week. So yay, nurses, yay. What they are going to do there is decide what charges are going to be, how many, like what her punishment is essentially going to be. The first thing I want to point out here is if you are following this case and you have really strong feelings about it, you can write to the judge, and I will include that information down in the description, who to write it to, and how to address the letter. And basically you can kind of plead the case of like, hey, I wrote one and I was like, I'm a nurse. I'm worried about the precedent this sets. This is why I'm worried about the precedents that this sets. Setting like, please have like a lenient charge, whatever. There's lots of templates you can even find online of people who kind of explain how you want to say it, but really anything you want to say is fine. So if you are inclined to send her a letter, golden. That's one of the first things I think we can do to make our voices heard. There's also going to be a march in Nashville on May 13th. Where people are just going to show up and show support for this. And again, a lot of this is support for just healthcare providers in general not being criminally charged for accidents. And RaDonda is the face of it. So even if you think like, hey, I guess if you think should be criminally charged, maybe it's probably not the best place to go. But again, even if you're like kind of on the fence, I think the main driving point of this is, why are we criminally charging nurses when something like this is happening? So the first thing I want to touch on here of why is it even a big deal that we're criminally charging nurses is the DA brought this case and basically said this error was bad enough to get charged criminally. And the problem with that is, where do we draw the line of bad enough? So medical errors, medication errors specifically in the US, kill 7,000 to 9,000 people. 7,000 to 9,000 people. And that's of the reported ones. As we can see, this poor patient was not even initially reported. So they wouldn't have been in that number because Vanderbilt did not report this. It was charted as a natural death because Vanderbilt told her not to document it. So having worked in healthcare for a decade, I can almost promise that number, 7,000 to 9,000 deaths a year, is double that in reality of how many patients die from a medication error. And that is horrifying. And it should horrify you. It horrifies me. And the issue with this case is this is going to decrease the amount of reporting that happens. People will not feel safe to report, so they will report less. And the reporting errors is how we learn in healthcare. So the problems that are leading to these horrifying 7,000 to 9,000 patient deaths a year are not going to be resolved. The problems are going to keep going, and that horrible mortality rate is going to go up. So that is why this is such a big deal on so many levels. One, horribly unsafe. Two, if we have 7,000 to 9,000 medical providers admitting to a medication error, where does that fall on the spectrum of criminal cases then? How do we decide, oh, your error was too bad, it's going to be charged criminally, or your error, not quite bad enough, it's not going to be charged criminally? Where does that line go? If you overstep one safety step, is that when you're safe? If you overstep two? And there's a lot of people coming out and saying, well, I've made a med error, but it wasn't that bad. So this was like especially bad. And I forget, I probably should have looked it up. There's a term like in psychology about like, if your mistake ended up not being that bad, you're more likely to look down at people whose mistakes did turn out poorly and be like, well, like, obviously I'm better than you. You may not be thinking this way, but your psychology is probably like, I'm pretty much better than you because my mistake, even though I made a mistake, mine turned out fine. Obviously yours is much worse. So that's kind of what we have going here. And I don't know how you would decide that. You're obviously not going to prosecute all 7,000 to 9,000 people who make a fatal med error. The people who just make med errors, that number was like 400,000. So obviously fatal med errors are not like, that's a small percentage, but that's still, it's not like, that is not an acceptable percentage. 7,000 to 9,000 is ridiculous. We need to get that number lower. So how are we going to get that number lower? Well, very fortunately, people have looked into this. They've said, oh, we actually would like most of our patients in healthcare to not pass away. So what can we do? We know humans are like, they're error prone. They're not perfect. How are we going to mesh this so that we promote people doing well? And in their research, they realized that attacking one person is not helpful, because all that really does is that teaches one person a lesson and it scares everyone else. However, if they look at the system that led them to fail, that is where you actually see a lot of patient lives saved. So obviously that's not what we're having in this case. In this case, we're having one person be punished. And this is ANA's. So like, to kind of summarize that, the ANA, which is the American Nursing Association, this is their statement. It's called just culture. When you have the target of focusing on making the environment more safe and the system more safe versus the one individual patient or person who made a mistake. So this says the American Nursing Association supports the just culture concept and its use in healthcare to improve patient safety. The ANA supports the collaboration of state boards of nursing, professional nursing associations, hospital associations, patient safety centers, and individual healthcare organizations in developing regional and statewide just culture initiatives. So what that is basically saying is the ANA, the American Nursing Association, is asking states to work with them. They're saying, hey, please do not go and attack individual people for mistakes when it is not appropriate. Please look at the system and hold the systems responsible, because that is what we have found will lead to actual change. Ultimately, the just culture model is about creating an open, fair, and just culture, creating a learning culture, designing safe systems, and managing behavioral choices. The model sees events not as a thing to be fixed, but as opportunities to improve understanding of both system risk and behavioral risk. It is also about changing staff expectations and behaviors to ones such looking at risks in the environment, reporting errors and hazards, helping to design safe systems, and making safe choices, including following procedure, making choices that align with organizational values, and never signing for something that was not done. So basically trying to promote an environment where people feel safe reporting errors, where they don't feel like there's going to be criminal charges against them, where they can admit what has happened and move on. This is pervasive throughout all of medicine. This is not in nursing, just in nursing. This is like what I was taught in NP school as well, is just, admit when you have done something wrong. And I know that in medical school and everything, it's the same exact thing. Just admit what has happened so we can all learn from it. A lot of hospitals, big institutions will have like grand rounds is what they call it. And when they have those, you basically bring different cases a lot of the times and you learn from them. You don't talk about necessarily what went right. A lot of those, or they'll also have something called morbidity and mortality. They call them M&M. They will go and you will learn from what was not done well before. And that is how, it sounds horrible. And I understand that from an outsider's perspective on medicine, this sounds bad. We're like saying, oh, don't punish a person. Just, also, by the way, there's thunder. So, and it's like pouring. So if all of a sudden I disappear, I apologize, but it sounds like my house is going to blow over. Anyway, this is how we learn. I know it sounds awful and it comes off a lot. And I've been told a lot in the last week that talking about this kind of comes off as like brash and like, oh, we don't care about if something happens to patients and everything like that. And I promise you, we are talking about this not to minimize patient outcomes that are poor. We're talking about this because we want to improve patient outcomes. So if you're listening to this and you think it just sounds wacky that, we're like throwing around like, oh, these people die, yada, yada. It is not, I promise, like, I'm trying to think of a better way to talk about all this without sounding so brash. It's also hard to remove yourself from a culture where you always talk about it in much more of a factual way, kind of without emotion. So I just wanted to put that out there, that if that's kind of coming off that way, I promise I'm trying to think of a better way to talk about it. And if you know of one, then please let me know. It really sounds like there's a hurricane outside my house. Okay. So I'm going to try to get through all the facts so that if my internet dies, then we're fine. So given that background, that is the backbone of safety in healthcare, right? Obviously, this is going against that. So this is the big thing. We're saying, hey, if you criminally charge people, no one's going to want to report, because in the back of their mind, they were already probably nervous, and now they're going to be like, oh my gosh, am I going to go to jail? And that's not going to create a culture that is saying, hey, like, tell us. That is not saying that errors are all excused. People all the time lose their licenses. All the time are put in like civil court cases where they're going to be like, hey, some mistakes, yeah, you're probably going to get punished for them. It doesn't mean you're going to go to jail. Those are two very different things. Let me show you how many people are not thrilled about this choice, because in the beginning, like it was kind of a lot of nurses talking about it. And slowly over the course of the last week, a lot of different other like organizations have come out and shown support and said, hey, this is not the way we do things. Look at the research, please. This is not showing up as just culture. This is not helpful. So the first one, ISMP, is the Institute for Safe Medication Practices. These are like the big overarching people who give you safe medical practices. This is who kind of rules that roost. So they're like the big organization. This was their statement on it. We do not believe criminal charges are justified. While our legal system allows for the criminalization of human error, even in the absence of any intent to cause harm, the ISMP does not believe criminal charges are justified in this case. In fact, we find it shameful that a nurse who is already suffering and paying the price for her error is now facing criminal indictment and possible trial, loss of her nursing license and livelihood, and time in prison. They went on to later say, I don't think I pulled the clip, where they thought this was like sending safety reporting back 25 years. Like, they were not holding back in their article. They were sassy. The American Nursing Association, again, came forward, and the ANA is not usually good at defending nurses in any way, shape, or form. And I have to commend them that they actually did something that benefited us. It was amazing. They came out and said the ANA believes the criminalization of medical errors could have a chilling effect on reporting and process improvement. The Code of Ethics for Nurses states that while ensuring that nurses are held accountable for individual practice errors, errors should be corrected or remediated, and disciplinary action taken only if warranted. So basically saying like, hey, did she really need to go to jail? Like, can't we just, take away her license and fine her $60,000 and give her these other civil penalties? And COVID-19 has already exhausted and overwhelmed the nursing force to a breaking point, kind of pointing out that like, hey, the nurses are kind of stressed. The nurses are stressed. Do we really want to poke this bear right now, is what I think the ANA is saying. Nurses are watching this case and rightfully concerned it will set a dangerous precedent. The ANA cautions against accidental medical errors being tried in a court of law. So go ANA. It's probably the first time you've stood up for us, and we appreciate you. Another one from the AACN, which is the Association of Critical Care Nurses. So RaDonda was a critical care nurse. They came out with a statement saying this conviction sets a dangerous precedent that puts patient safety at risk for years to come. Decades of safety research, including the Institute of Medicine's pioneering report To Err is Human, has demonstrated that a punitive approach to healthcare errors drives problems into shadows and decreases patient safety. In addition, catastrophic errors are often the result of many factors, and the ability to safely report errors allows for root cause analysis and correction of systematic problems. So that's an excellent summary, I think. And if you're curious what the To Err is Human, that's kind of like the initial book that the Institute for Safe Medication Practices kind of was launched out of. And this came out, I believe, in 2000, when they were just starting to realize like, hey, maybe punishing each individual person isn't the way to go. Maybe looking at patterns and seeing what went wrong that led up to this is actually the way to go. And we've been rolling with that ever since. So this is the book, To Err is Human. Or the paper, it came out in 2000. To Err is Human breaks the silence that has surrounded the medical errors and consequence, but not by pointing fingers at caring healthcare professionals who make honest mistakes. After all, To Err is Human. Instead, this book sets forth a national agenda with state and local implications for reducing medical errors and improving patient safety through the designs of a safer health system. To Err is Human asserts that the problem is not bad people in healthcare. It is that good people are working in bad systems and need to be made safer. So that is the basis of kind of the backbone of what we've built all of patient safety off of. And we've seen a lot of really good improvements. When people can feel like they're safe to report, then things, usually they can put systems in place to get better. And a very annoying thing is that the hospital, especially in this case, didn't do anything. So RaDonda immediately admitted what she had done. The hospital then, they had told her, don't document it because it'll technically be in the electronic health record. So then it was not documented. So then when the physician went to go sign the death certificate, he put natural causes because he couldn't find anywhere that the medication was given erroneously in the chart. So he put natural causes. And then when they reported to the medical examiner, they were able to say, oh, well, they put natural causes related to a brain bleed, which is why the patient was in the hospital. The medical examiner looked at the MRI, said, yeah, there's a brain bleed. Okay, that checks out. Nowhere on there did we really have a discussion about, was it discussed like, oh, that we accidentally gave this medicine too, because that wasn't charted. So Vanderbilt never reported it. And the incident report that was risen, she did write an incident report, but they didn't do anything about it. So that's another huge thing that is just mind-boggling with this case is we need to be reporting, and we need to be reporting often, because the other thing we have to do in this is it's pointing out how corrupt a lot of our healthcare systems are, because Vanderbilt paid the family off. And then in return for, a lot of times hospitals will almost always settle with patients when something happens and there's a lawsuit. If there's a poor outcome, and the patient will just give the patient's family a lot of money and say, hey, you can't talk about this, which is why we did not see the patient's family discussing anything in court. They had come out with a statement saying they didn't want charges pressed, but they were not actually allowed to talk about anything related to the case. And all those articles have mysteriously disappeared off of the internet now that all of this has come out. So my point with that is saying, I think this case also points out a lot of the nasty side of healthcare that I think it's good for the public to know about. I know my husband had no idea. I was like, yeah, don't you know that hospitals just pay off most people and that's how they get out of all these lawsuits? He was like, no. He's like, that sounds shady. I was like, yeah, it's real shady. So that is also happening. And reporting this is going to help hold hospitals accountable. So let's move into things that are actually going to help. So first of all, if you're a nurse or a nursing student, this is where I'm hoping to maybe make you feel a little bit better. First, I hope. I'm also talking and trying to make myself feel better. It's going to be fine. First, I think it would be a really good idea to understand legally how to protect your license. I feel like we don't learn that in school. I will leave a link in the description below to a course from Your Nurse Lawyer. She's a nurse and a lawyer. She has courses for, I believe they're $50, one for nurses and one for advanced practice providers. And she talks you through how to protect your license and about malpractice insurance and is it right for you and things you can do, ways you can document in order to avoid running into errors. Hang on, need a drink. Basically how to cover your butt through documentation. So I think I wish we had that in school. We don't. So I will leave that linked down below. And another thing that we can just start to do is report everything. So I know when I was a nurse, I did not like to file incident reports. You can let me know in the comments if you like to file incident reports, but I hated it with a passion. I felt like it took up too much time, that no one ever looked at them, and that I didn't care. That sounds bad, but I was just I'm not going to write a near miss incident report, but I'm telling you, I wish I could go back and write all the near miss incident reports. So a near incident report is something that you write to the hospital. It's supposed to be kept within the hospital unless you're like Vanderbilt and then you released it. So these are supposed to be confidential within the hospital, just noting the higher ups. Hey, this is going on a lot and this is not a good problem, so that it can be identified and we can fix the problems. You can report, I don't know why I said this is. You can either report, my brain's going in 12 directions, ADHD problems. The things that you can report are either errors, so things that had happened, oh, I did a med error, my patient fell, something has actually happened and this is not good. Or you can report near misses. So hey, I almost made an error, or hey, this is confusing and I could see it leading to an error. We need to start reporting those because those are the things that are going to learn from. And when they see patterns, they'll be able to recognize them and then implement changes. And if anything happens, you will be able to have a paper trail saying, hey, I notified you of this and nothing happened. Sorry, I just put a cough drop in thinking that would help with my throat being scratchy. And now I realize that that's probably not going to help. I'm going to spit it out. Oh, please hold. All right. Good luck, throat. So that's another thing we can do. Report incidents before they happen or when, even if they haven't happened. That way we can actually see change because a lot of times people don't even know. They might not even know up there in the wizarding world of high nursing that things are a problem and we should let them know. So be that whistleblower. Another thing, set really good boundaries. If you don't feel safe, if you do not feel like something is under what you feel comfortable doing, say no. You're going to get pushback for it. If they come to you and they say, why is it taking you so long to pass your meds? Explain why. Tell them, I don't feel comfortable going any faster. If they are complaining, that Mr. Jones was mad that his 10 o'clock med wasn't given on time. Well, here's why it wasn't, because I was double checking this and I was doing this. Firm boundary. Hey, we want you to float over here. Firm boundary. No, I don't feel safe doing that. She shouldn't have even probably been floating to a different unit. She'd only been a nurse for 2 years. You don't send baby nurses floating to do like all the work in the hospital. What are we thinking? Set boundaries, learn how to say no. People are going to get real mad. Let them get mad. I'm sorry about my throat dying. People are probably going to get mad. You're going to have to just let them get mad. People don't like boundaries when they're on the recipient end of them. So new grads especially set really good boundaries. This is something I wish I learned way earlier in my career. No means no. Don't feel bad. You don't have to give explanations. And then talk to the people. The next thing is just talk to the people who come to your unit. I ran away from JCO and all the quality improvement people, like my life depended on it. And I wish I had kind of just ratted out everything to them. I didn't want to talk to them, so I ran away. It would have been a good idea to be like, hey, this is a hot mess. Like, let me walk you through this disaster zone when it was a disaster. It wasn't always a disaster, and show you exactly what's wrong. Talk to the people when they're coming for if you have magnet recertification or whatever, let them know what the culture is like, what everything is like. Like, do not run away from the people who are on your side trying to do some digging for you. You know what I mean? And in terms of people, if you are not in healthcare, what you can do is support measures like when you're voting and let your local Congress and Senate people, all the government people know, like send in letters. Go to any meetings and say, we want safer staffing ratios. We do not want people to be criminally prosecuted. You can write a letter to that judge. And whenever things come up on the ballot saying safer staffing ratios, you want to support that, because if you have too many patients, you are much more likely to cut corners just to get through your day. And you're going to make errors when you start cutting corners. So those are the primary things. I think if we implement those, if we go slow, another thing I would probably, in a boundary sense, I would not override meds. Like, I would be very hesitant to override meds at this point. And I wouldn't be giving too many meds without an order. If your hospital has standing order, start asking, say you're in a rapid response and they're wanting you to pull, pull meds for a rapid that they'll write an order for later, which was how it worked a lot of the times in my institution. Write an incident report about that after and be like, hey, I didn't feel comfortable pulling meds that I didn't have that I only had a verbal order for. Maybe we need to start implementing standing orders, but reporting all of that little stuff and just starting to make other people aware of what is actually happening. I know it's really hard for and this is one I don't know the solution to, is just making the public aware of what is actually going on in healthcare. And I know you can't talk about it too much. Like, I'm very privileged that I can, because I don't have a job within a healthcare system. So I am free to talk about it without risking to losing my job. But sharing things with other people, like just trying to get the word out of like what is actually going on in healthcare and what the problems are. so that we can promote a safer environment where patients are safer, we feel safer going into work, and yeah, all of that. I think that's pretty much all of the major points that I wanted to cover. So now we'll kind of go into like a Q&A little portion for the next like 20 minutes or so. If any of you have any questions, I'll scroll through. My sister's moderating it too. So if she sees any questions, Rachel, feel free to tell me like any that would be, good to answer. But thanks for coming and listening so far. It's just been like a hot mess. KL, I will add the course. I will add the nurse lawyer course afterwards. I haven't set up the description very well yet. So full disclosure, Rachel, if you want to throw those down there in the description, you are more than welcome to. But yeah, that's where we are. Melissa says, I'm a nurse in Australia. Can you explain what everyone means by scanning meds? Yeah. So when you go to a computer, let's look. When you go to a computer, medications usually have a barcode on them, and you scan it with a scanner. Let me see. I think from my last live, yeah, we have this. So this is what you get medication out of. This is an Accudose or an Omnicell and a Pyxis, anything like that. And you see that scanner like that's right at the orange dot. You can scan the medication and it'll come up on your computer and verify with you, hey, this is the right patient. The computer knows who the patient is, and it can all give you feedback. So it'll warn you, hey, this is not the right med. This isn't even ordered. You should probably reevaluate that. In RaDonda's case, there was no scanner in the department where she was administering the med. So that would be a systems error. Like this is again, coming back to let us look at the entire problem versus focusing just on what she did, because she was already punished for what she did. So let's now try to tackle the systems error. Maybe we should put a scanner in a department that we're giving meds in. Like we should probably do that. Maybe we should not send out memos to our entire staff saying, hey, you're going to have to override all your meds because the computer's not talking to this. And like, it's fine. But there were a lot of systems errors in RaDonda's case, which does not excuse what happened, but it shows a lot of room for improvement. Let me see what Andrew said. What do you suggest for nursing students whose school is against RaDonda, but you support her? I mean, who cares if your nursing school is against RaDonda? You can still be for her. You are not your nursing school. You don't need to unite with them. I don't think you have to. I mean, who cares what they think? You can have your own opinion. Have your own opinion, stand strong in it. You can do it. Chris said, hi, love your content. Why, thank you. I love that you watch it. Do you have any advice for a nursing student who will be graduating soon? I think the biggest thing is going to be boundaries and set really, really firm ones in the beginning. So don't really try not to take verbal orders. Just be like, I'm just going to wait until you write that down. I don't feel comfortable taking a verbal order because you don't know enough yet. Set boundaries on where you will go and what weird situations you will allow yourself to be in. Set boundaries on overriding meds. Pull in a buddy. Whenever you have a question, pull someone else in and be like, will you look at this with me? Will you double check it? If anything feels weird in your gut, you need to go and look and just get a second pair of eyes on it. Do not be afraid to say no, and kind of come up with ahead of time what you will say when people give you backlash, right? So when you set a boundary and say, no, I'm not going to take a verbal order because I don't want to accidentally mess it up. No, I don't want to do this and this and this. People are going to be annoyed. And you can just say hey, I'm fairly new. I do not feel comfortable doing that yet. And I just want to keep the patient safe. That is usually a fairly good line, but practice whatever line you want to have for when you get pushback, so that it comes right out of your mouth and you don't have to think of it in the moment when you feel really frazzled because you're getting pushed back from someone who is in a position of authority, like your boss, over you, if that makes sense. Let me see. Laura said, I find it frustrating to keep hearing that your nurses shouldn't be precepting when my experience is that is that if we don't allow 2-year nurses to precept, there are a few nurses left, especially now. Yeah. I thought this was interesting too, that they said like, oh, if you've only been a nurse for 2 years, you shouldn't be precepting. Friend, I was precepting when I was a 4-month-old nurse. I was a charge nurse when I was a 3-month-old nurse. It was not safe. It was not good, but it was what we had. I was the most senior person at that point on night shift, and that is what we had. So yeah, I think a lot of people don't live in the real world and don't see what is actually happening, because this happens all the time. And maybe that is the ICU. Like maybe she was the best person to precept in that ICU. It sounds like she's very personable. So maybe if they had someone who had 3 years of experience but was really nasty, I would always put someone with a 2-year experienced nurse over a 3-year, because if they were really nasty and the other person was really nice, because they're going to learn more from the person who was actually nice. Let me see. Yeah. Professor Cutubai said no scanner. Oh, wow. Yeah. No scanner. The MAR, which was the electronic health record, was not talking to the Pyxis or her AccuDose either. So, and that was a known problem in the ICU because they were switching over to a new charting system, Epic. So they had literally been given a handout saying you're going to need to override all your meds. So that's a problem. Justine, what can new nurses do to avoid this? Set really good boundaries. Don't do things you're uncomfortable with. Double check everything. Go slow, even if they yell at you for going slow. Document anything that, like, report, incident report on anything that you see as a stumbling block. I think this is really helpful for new nurses too, because new nurses have a totally new view on things. Once you've been a nurse for a while, you are very used to the system and things are going to kind of just fly over your head. You're like, oh, I've done this a million times. This probably isn't the best, but I'm used to it by now. Whereas new nurses, you can come in and you can see a system with brand new eyes. So you are invaluable in reporting things that don't look safe, that don't look right. On and on. Nurse Scott, I'm curious what system errors were involved in this case. It seemed that all the errors were RaDondas. I talked about this a lot in my first video, but the big ones are that the computer system, the EMR was not talking to the med dispenser. So all the ICU nurses at that time had to override, I believe it was their controlled meds. So they were having she had to override it over and over. They gave the order they said, another thing that is problematic is they said Versed instead of, they should have said, in my opinion, midazolam, because that would prompt her to go and type midazolam, which is the generic name of the drug, into the computer. But instead they told her Versed, but the computer required the generic name. So we've talked about that a little bit before, where we have, with the medicine, the brand name is Versed. That's what we call it a lot in healthcare. But the generic name that the Omnicell, the medicine dispenser, requires is midazolam. I think I have had a med error where I was told a brand name and I pulled the wrong generic name because I had to also override it. And the error was caught before I gave it to the patient. However, then I wrote an incident report about it, and the institution actually changed the policy to, if you are giving a verbal order, it can only be in the generic name, which reduces the likelihood that you go to the Omnicell and you type the wrong thing in. Mine was with Valium, and I had pulled Ativan, but they had ordered Valium because I was thinking of the wrong benzo. Let me see. And the next one was there was no scanner in the department that she had to go to. The next one was they had not done any education on monitoring patients. So she thought she was giving Versed, and Vanderbilt did not have a policy to monitor patients on Versed. It was not on the list of monitorable medicines. So she was told, hey, you don't have to monitor this patient. She should have. We all, I think, in healthcare, we would know, okay, Versed is a sedative, so we probably should monitor her. However, she was told you don't have to. And she was a nurse for 2 years. So I think she wasn't quite at the point where maybe she should have. Either way, she should have stayed with the patient to monitor them, but she did not, because she had been told hey, you don't have to monitor them. And this was not a policy that was in place at Vanderbilt. So she didn't monitor them. Just a lot of different things that went wrong. She was also told don't chart after the medication was given. Her nurse manager said, don't worry about charting it once the error was revealed, because she said it'll show you pulled the med from the since you did an override. So there's no need to chart it, which is obviously not true. And then Vanderbilt covered the whole thing up. So those are just a few of the situations that happened that we need to look at as a system. Again, RaDonda accepts full responsibility for it. What I'm focusing on here is what can you do as a nurse, as a nursing student, as just a regular person in the population in order to make our hospitals and our healthcare systems safer, both for ourselves, for healthcare people, and for patients. And so that's kind of what we're focusing on. But that's a brief rundown of, I know what you and Mercy asked, what were some of the systems problems? And those were some of them. I have a whole YouTube video where I talked about in depth all the system errors, which again, does not diminish. I feel like there's been a lot on the internet of, system errors versus RaDonda errors. There can be both. This is a situation where we have both. And it's just about, RaDonda was punished civilly. She lost her license. She did all these things. How are we holding hospitals accountable? How can we hold hospitals accountable? And that's by reporting, setting really good boundaries, and just taking our time. AB, she was sentenced. She was found guilty of reckless or negligent homicide and neglect of a impaired adult. They have not done her. Oh no, she wasn't sentenced. So no, just kidding. Right. She was charged but not sentenced. That's when they decide what actually is going to happen with her. Let me see. It's frustrating. Justine says it's frustrating because everyone seems so bothered in healthcare. I think a lot of people are really bothered in healthcare right now. I think coming off of the pandemic where a lot of people had to do a lot of things that we were really uncomfortable with. And then the public kind of went from like, oh, yay, you to, oh, I hate you with like masks. And I know I just got a lot of hatred, which is a huge reason why I just I'm taking a break because I just got screamed at for like 2 years straight and it was rough. Having to work in dangerous conditions, seeing a lot of really terrible things, I think puts people in like a state. And then it's kind of just been like mandated staffing now, and you're getting mandated overtime. And now this comes out and you're like, oh my gosh, am I going to go to jail because we don't have enough nurses and everyone's quitting? And it's just a rough bit. I will say that it wasn't always like this, and I don't think it always will, especially if we keep advocating for ourselves, setting really good boundaries, reporting things that are unsafe, and being really loud about it. And if you can't be loud about it because you're worried that your job is going to fire you, amplifying voices that can be loud about it. There are so many awesome people on social media, not like me, but like so many other people on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube who are being voices for this, who can't get fired because they don't work in healthcare systems anymore, but who know about what happens in them, sending those to your family and your friends. And you're saying, this is happening because it's a frustration that hospitals have done a really good job of kind of shielding the public. Like, do you remember in the pandemic when they didn't want nurses to wear masks because they didn't want to scare the public? That happens all the time in healthcare where things are not looked into a bunch because we don't want to scare the public. Hospitals don't want people to come out and say how things really are because that would inspire fear in the public. And I think that we could approach that differently by just being honest. I think people can handle the truth. I think it puts unfair expectations on staff that work, healthcare providers, healthcare, anyone in healthcare, to meet these expectations that patients have that everything's perfect and wonderful. But you can't give perfect and wonderful care if you're working in a system that's just, it's not quite working, but you don't say anything about it. So it never gets better, but the expectation is still there. So we're just going to complain a lot louder within our systems in useful ways. You know what I mean? And then we can rant on the internet too. But doing reporting, telling people, reporting to CMS. You can tell CMS, which is Center for Medicaid Services, if things are going weird in your hospital, you can go tell CMS and they will investigate it. That's who investigated Vanderbilt, because Vanderbilt covered all of this up for 10 months until an anonymous person wrote into Vanderbilt and said, hey, did you know that this happened? And they said, excuse me, no. And then they went to Vanderbilt and said, we will no longer pay you unless you put some processes in, unless you explain what has happened and show us that you've done something to fix it. And it was then that Vanderbilt resubmitted RaDonda's in, because the board of nursing had already said, hey, we think this is a horrible accident, like, but we're not going to do anything about it. And everything went on. And then 10 months later, CMS did this. Vanderbilt got notice they weren't going to get any more money. And they said, oh, we're going to resubmit the file for RaDonda, like report her to the Department of Health. And that's when things started happening. That's when she got criminally tried. So that's what was going on there. Nurse Scott, instead of frightening nursing and students, can we make this an opportunity to rededicate ourselves to safety and accountability? I mean, I think that yes. And this is like, we had talked in the beginning about like, instead of frightening nursing and students, and I just posted about this on Instagram, that I think the goal isn't to frighten nursing students. The goal isn't to frighten new nurses. If you feel like that this is the goal, then that's fine, but that's not my goal. My goal is to let people have their eyes be wide open going into a career. We know so many nurses leave within the first 5 years of their career, right? Why is that? It's probably because we set up unreal expectations about what this career is going to look like. We don't talk about all the stuff they're going to see once they get in here. And this is what's happening. And I feel like we need to bring these conversations out into the light and know it's not all sunshine and roses, but the people, like, if you don't know about this stuff going in, you're going to realize it once you get in, and then you're going to leave, versus maybe this just wasn't the field you wanted to go into in the first place, but you didn't know because the representation of it on social media and the world in general isn't accurate. So I don't like to, in my mind, I don't see it as like frightening nurses and students. It's telling them, here's the problem. Here's what we can actually do to fix it. You know what I mean? I think no one goes into this saying, hey, I'm going to make a med error. Hey, I'm going to be negligent. But I don't think worrying mostly about like, oh, how am I going to be even safer? Like we found that in research shows us that that's not very effective. The most effective thing is to say, how can I make my system safer? Through reporting, through talking to people, through being the squeaky wheel, being like, hey, this is not safe. This is not safe. Obviously, yes, taking the time to like do your job diligently, but there are going to be days that you are tired, that life is happening outside of work, and you are just like, it's not happening, that for whatever reason you're distracted. And you are going to you're probably going to make an error. Pretty much all nurses have made med errors. I've made several, not on purpose. It wasn't like I was like telling myself, oh, I am going to be less accountable and safe today. It was, life was happening. And I needed a safe system to fall into. And I was caught by my safe system on all the times. I was caught by a safe system, except for once where I was just, forgot to unclamp the roller clamp on an IV piggyback. That was just Liz not being smart. But like all of my other ones were caught by the system. So if we're discussing this, I don't think it's scaring nurses. You are more than welcome to think it's scaring nurses, but that is my opinion on this. And I would rather focus on making the system better rather than telling people you need to try harder. Yes, everyone is so busy. They don't want to help. I'm assuming that's for like within the hospital, like it's hard to find someone to double check. And that's very true. Nurse Scott, better staffing would help with that. Yeah, I think better staffing is like a huge component of all of it. Write incident reports about not having enough staff, write incident reports about whatever. Allie Stevens says apparently they were in a system transition and were doing overrides for weeks. The scanner was nowhere to be found. Several things. Yeah, there was no scanner in the basement. There's no med scanner in radiology. So yeah. Justine, Nurse Scott's video does a great job breaking down all the errors. I remember watching his video for a thorough breakdown. So you can go check out he's in the chat. So you can go click on his and you can look at errors, but I would also encourage you to also look for the systems problems, because it's never like we had seen in the, let's go back and look at the ANA statement. Were they the ones that said, Um, they were accountable, or was it this? Changing staff and reporting hazards, blah, blah, blah. I can't find where it is, but basically saying we have found that it is very, very rarely a individual person problem. It is a system problem that let them get there. It's kind of like with your kids. If you're a parent, a lot of the times you have to take a step back and see what brought you here. In order for this behavior to be shown. And I'm going through, let me see, I'm trying to find opinions that are disagreeing with me so that we can have a conversation. Because I don't want to just present it as like, I'm always right. Obviously, I think I'm always right. But I do want to have some discussion about like from different viewpoints and just like challenge them. Hopefully this isn't coming off in like a malicious way. But just a different opinion. Nurse Scott says, I did not pay LCO5 to say that. So I think it's always good to go and see a different perspective. Nurse Scott, I'll go and watch your video and see what that one's all about. Because if we don't watch other opinions, we can't, you're only seeing your one side, and there's so many different sides to it. So many different sides. And again, with it being RaDonda's fault, she admits it's her fault. This is about what else is going on. What can we actually do? Because targeting, again, one person does not solve the problem as a whole. And we need to solve the problem as a whole because as we've seen, 7,000 to 9,000 patients are dying a year from medication errors. So this is, we don't want to target this one. We want to target something that's going to look at how can we reduce this overall? And that's by looking at systems and not cherry picking, these individual people who are making errors. Fun Size Journey said exactly, why do nurses only have to know generic names? I know a lot of doctors who don't even know generic names. Yeah, this is a huge problem. I really wish it was that we just went by generic names and kind of got rid of the brand names. This is what they do in most countries. In most countries, you only have to know what the generic name is. They don't even know what the brand name is. They're like, why would you know the brand name? That's not safe. So there's that. Let me see. That's crazy that there's no scanner down in radiology. I shouted for Laura for 3 hours and my nurse took us down to give a med. And the fact that no system is in place down there is wild to me. Yes, it is. I have had to go down to radiology with my patients and it is our radiology also did not have that. Did not have a scanner, and I was terrified to give the medicine. Let me see. So I think this was probably a while back up on the chat, but Rachel showed me one and it was Rose. And she said, I'm honestly annoyed and saddened by how many nurses are trying to downplay the whole thing like it's some silly mistake. She got what she deserves. She broke so many rules and safety rules that were in place. And I think I don't ever want to make it seem like I totally see where you're coming from with like feeling like it's being downplayed. And I think the thing to focus on with this is like taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture. You know what I mean? I am in no way trying to downplay how sad the situation is. Like, I think this is where it can get kind of lost in. It's hard to talk about it in a way that comes off as not really brusque. You know what I mean? Because we see in healthcare so many bad outcomes, so many patient deaths, so many terrible things that you almost get like not numb to it, but you get used to talking about things in a much more like statistical way. All of our research is in statistics. So we're talking all the time about like, oh yes, like this person, this horrible thing happened to this person, this person, this person. And it comes off like, I think we said, like it can come off really off. So I have really tried to this week I've gotten feedback about a lot of that. So I've tried to come off and say, I'm trying to look at this as a systems problem, not as what did she do? More of looking at this as a case example of like, yes, it was horrible. Like the way the patient died was horrible. The family's experience, that is horrible. I'm not in any way trying to downplay that. I am trying to say this is horrible And at the same time, this is happening on such a huge scale. 7,000 to 9,000 people die from medication errors every single year. And that is not okay. So how do we fix this? Because it's not just this one problem. It's a huge problem. So we obviously need to zoom out and say, is this a precedent that we want to set, that we criminalize nursing mistakes? And she has said this was a huge mistake. She's lost her nursing license. She has been punished for her mistake. I do not think it was intentional. I don't think that criminal charges are helpful because I do not think she did it on purpose. And what is going to jail going to do? You know what I mean? Jail kind of exists, at least in my mind, as a place to kind of put people who are a danger to society, so they don't hurt people again, right? Or to punish someone because of a direct decision, like that they purposefully made, they intended harm. I don't think she intended harm. She's not a danger to society because she's not a nurse anymore. So I don't understand the criminal aspect of it here. But I think if we charge her criminally, we're going to set the precedent that if you make a mistake, you are going to jail. So less people are going to report mistakes, and we can't improve the system overall that so desperately needs improving because we have 7,000 to 9,000 people dying a year that don't need to die. And that's why we need to look at the system. And that is how we're going to make it safer for the patient and for everyone else. So that's kind of, she did break rules. She broke rules. She broke a lot of them. There were also system errors that helped her, that made those errors easier. So it's not I'm not trying to say like to excuse what she did, because I think she made a lot of errors. She admits I made a lot of them, but also there were system errors, and maybe this would not have happened. I would argue that it would not have happened if there was a scanner. She would have scanned that med and it would immediately have popped up and said, hey, this is the wrong med. That doesn't excuse her behavior, but that's saying, please help me focus on the system errors and how we can change those, and using her case as kind of the launching off point, and not in a way to excuse her behavior, but just to say, look at this example, this horrible example. I don't think that criminally charging her is going to lead to anything going forward. If that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me see. Thanks for leaving so many comments, guys. I am not going to be able to reply to all of them, but I appreciate it. I think everybody else appreciates being able to go back and kind of have this, like back and forth. This is obviously a really, really difficult conversation. You know what I mean? But I appreciate that everyone's being respectful and having it, because these conversations are hard and people are really, really heated. I've been introduced to TikTok. TikTok is wild, guys. TikTok is absolutely wild. I was not prepared for the heat that comes with TikTok, but also the sass that I'm allowed to give. I really do appreciate. So it's a gentle balance. You can go follow me on TikTok. It's been a fun time. Let me see. Sweetie, I don't think the debate is whether RaDonda did something wrong. I think the debate should be, is being criminally charged, and how is she the only one accountable? Exactly. That summed this whole video up really well. You probably should have just made it yourself and it would have been a lot shorter. I agree. The debate is not about if she did something wrong. I think we all think she did something wrong. I think we all think she made a mistake. She thinks she made a mistake. The issue is, are we really going to go down the criminal charges rabbit hole for healthcare providers? And where does that cut off? Like I said, how many errors, what kind of error is too big of an error to all of a sudden pass over from civil court to criminal court? Where do we draw that line? Because there doesn't seem to be a clear line, where you say, hey, you gave this med and this happened. Like, of the 7,000 to 9,000 charges we would have to be filing every year for fatal med errors, hey, is it because you overrode two things? Is it because you overrode one system error versus three? Is it, that this patient got a lot of press, and so now we're going to charge it? Like, where does that line kind of go? I am curious to know how you feel about distraction playing into this error. I think distraction was huge. She said that she had a preceptee with her. So she was training someone. I know I make distraction, is huge. I think I have definitely, I cannot focus very well on pulling up meds or doing things that require like executive function when I'm talking to people. So I don't think I would be able to explain how to do a swallow study while overriding a med. I might be able to explain how to do a swallow study while like priming IV tubing. And that is probably about as much as I could muster without being worried. And I might not even be able to do that. I think distraction was a huge thing. And then this again plays into like how she felt, this isn't excusing her behavior. This is saying this was probably why she was like, she felt rushed, probably because she was already heading to go help someone else in the ER with a swallow study. And then the radiology doctor called and said, if you don't get this patient this medicine now, we're sending her back and we're canceling her scan. So there was a time pressure where she knew, oh, I have to get this patient their med or they're going to send this patient back up from PET scan. This is going to delay their discharge. It's Christmas. This patient wants to go home and spend, it was the day after Christmas, like time with her family. So there was a time crunch that she felt. So she was probably like, I'm going to explain this while I'm doing this. Again, not justifying it, things just like trying to put myself in her situation and seeing what I would have done. Because if I felt like I was in a time crunch, maybe I would have been like, hey, let me explain this. So another great tip for you guys, if you are new nurses or you're in nursing school, don't talk while you're drawing up meds. Okay. I would like just ignore people like no other when I was drawing up meds. And most people generally do. When you see people drawing up meds, at least where I worked, like people were not like, having these deep conversations when you were actively drawing up meds. Sure, maybe when you're like doing other things in the med room, there was like chatter going on. But when you were like actively like really trying to calculate how to dilute a dose and, or like pull up a partial dose and calculate it, like there's not a lot of talking. And I would encourage you not to have that be your primary talking time. Like Nurse Scott has said, like just go slow and be really careful. And just don't talk to people during those times. Because I think she probably was distracted and that obviously is not going to help anyone. Let me see. Jolene Crawford said, and if nurses are going to be criminally charged, then let's start with doctors who operate on the wrong extremity or amputate a wrong extremity and remove an organ and then lose the specimen. So this is talking about at Vanderbilt. This also plays into a lot of the frustration that nurses have felt surrounding this, is that she's being punished for this, like criminally charged. However, there are physicians that have removed the wrong kidney, that have removed, I think, a thyroid gland, something that wasn't supposed to be removed, and then they lost it. There have been a lot of different cases that have not been good. I think someone chopped off the wrong leg, that like a patient had gangrene. So it was like rotting their poor leg and they chopped off the wrong one. So then they had to go back and chop off the other one. So then they lost both of their legs. And I'm pretty sure from what I've read that those people are all still working there and Vanderbilt just kind of paid the hush money and now it's done. And that I don't like to harp on how physicians and nurses are treated incredibly differently when it comes to this, because I don't want to deepen the divide of like, well, why are you doing this to them, but not to us? But I think there is also, and I don't want to like make it, I feel like doctors and nurses and all healthcare people, we all need to team up against the hospitals and the healthcare systems and like fight back together. So this point is actually hard for me because I agree. Why on one hand is it that when a nurse does something terrible, and by the way, a couple of those patients died, that the physicians did that when they removed the kidney. She ended up dying later of a complication of dialysis, was directly caused by she needed dialysis because they took her kidney out. And so those things have led to horrible outcomes, but why aren't they punished? Why is this nurse punished instead? Why didn't Vanderbilt go the extra length to cover this up? Instead, they covered up those. I think it comes down to provide like nurse practitioners, physicians, PAs make the hospital money and nurses cost the hospital money. So one is a money generator and one is a money, you have to pay for them. But again, I totally agree, but I don't love to harp on those points. I think we can harp on points that are just more like, hey, let's work on charting better. Let's work on reporting better. That doesn't cause divisiveness, because we need to really be a team if we want to see change. And as true as that might be, that is very unfair. I think saying things like that just causes animosity. And that might just be my bias because I'm a nurse practitioner, and I see it from that side of like, that kind of gets if I was them, I would feel kind of defensive. Whereas I want the physicians to all come over to the nursing side and be angry with us, because this affects them too. This is a healthcare wide thing that they could be criminally prosecuted maybe. So like, I see your point. I haven't touched on that on a bunch because I just kind of want to team up, and that's going to require allowing a few of our points to rest, but that's just my opinion. I know a lot of people have been really harping on that all over social media. And again, everyone kind of gets to choose how they look, what kind of things they want to pull for and advocate for. And that's one that I'm just kind of like letting go. Abby said, what kind of consequences did the facility face? None. They covered it up. When it was discovered that they covered it up, CMS, so Centers for Medicaid Services, came out and said, hey, we're going to cut all your funding, aka we're not going to pay you. At which point Vanderbilt said, well, we're going to make changes. And then they made changes. And then mysteriously after that, in order to this is all me speculating, I think then they probably maybe got the DA who didn't work at the university or at the hospital, but did work for the university. He was a professor at Vanderbilt, who was also the district attorney. Maybe, in my opinion, said, hey, could you prosecute this nurse again? Could you prosecute this nurse and get some of the attention off of us? Because CMS is going to the public and saying like, hey, Vanderbilt covered this up. And this certainly was a distractor. The DA is also up for re-election, and I think he knew that this case would be really, really high profile, and it got his name out in the news a lot. So it gets kind of icky, but nothing happened to Vanderbilt. Absolutely nothing happened to the hospital, which is usually what happens. I have seen countless horrible things happen in hospitals and healthcare systems I've worked for, and nothing happens. You pay the family off, nothing happens. And that is frustrating. Fred said, it's not right. It'll drive us to hide errors. Now the doctors will pin even more stuff on the nurses because they can. I think it will drive errors because people are going to pause. People already paused before reporting errors. At least I know I always did. I feel like I did always report my errors, but I've talked about on, I think, Instagram or TikTok that when you make that error and I still always paused. And I was like, oh, dang it. I'm like, where's this girl trying to go? Dang it. This is going to really suck once I admit that this is going on. Yeah. Let me see. Trying to see other side. Allison Fleming, I see both sides. Yes, she was reckless in her practice and giving them med and missing a ton of red flags, but I also she does not deserve jail time. Yeah. So I agree. I mean, she had her license revoked. Like, we did the things. Is it really going to do anything else if we put her in jail and set that precedent? And I feel like scare a bunch of people. Let me see. Where is that line, Justine? Yeah. Where is that line? I have no idea of the criminal case. Like, who do we try? Who do we not? Yeah. Nurse Scott, the DA, is also faculty at the Vanderbilt Law School. Interesting little connection there. Have you guys also seen the case of, there was a nurse in Philadelphia, Christiane Gainey, maybe? And I was going to try to cover hers, but I couldn't find the court documents. And I really don't want to draw anything from, like with this case, I went to the CMS document and the, things that they submitted to the actual court. I was able to find that. So that's how I got all this information. And with Christiane's, she was another nurse that got criminally tried in Philadelphia and just actually took a plea deal this week. hers, I couldn't find the actual documents, so I didn't feel comfortable doing it based on like reported articles. But her case was very similar in that she made an error. It wasn't a medication error, but she made an error. A patient passed away. The board of nursing basically said, it's okay. Like, not it's okay, but like, hey, here we're going to do this. Like, these are the things we're going to do with your license. And we're not going to pursue this really further. And then the person who had passed away was the father of someone that worked in the White House under the, I think it was while Trump was president. And because it was 2017 as well. And they basically, the White House called in a favor and then they criminally investigated her and told the Department of Health to overrule it. And then they went back. So maybe looking too at like, can Department of Health's really, like, why can you report to them so many times about the same incident? Maybe they can't, maybe they shouldn't be allowed to change their mind. Like, why are they changing their mind when all of a sudden they're getting a lot of pushback from high profile, wealthy institutions and people? Maybe they should just be able to make their unbiased decisions. And once they've done that, it's kind of like double jeopardy where it's like, hey, we've already made the decision. And maybe that would be legislation that, we could support going forward if that ever became a thing. Because it seems to me like there is now a pattern of high power people with a lot of money pushing on situations. And then all of a sudden nurses are getting blamed for or being the brunt of it when really it's a systems error. With the case of Christine, she was like she was a nurse in a long-term care facility. She had 39 patients and she was a traveler. So this was like one of her first days at this job, I think. And they were basically saying that she should have been able to do Q15, do all these assessments on this patient, which would be impossible, and like watch him. They're like, well, he was a falls risk. And you were like, but you were the only person. They didn't have any help. She was the only one for 39 people. That's, yes, what she did was wrong, but also why is one nurse in charge of 39 people without help? So again, looking at the system rather than targeting the individual. Let me see. Travis, you're spot on, Liz. Oh, thanks. I guess we'll move into comments that agree with me now. Just kidding. I really do try to show both sides. And then, like I said, just discuss them, how they are. Just left ER back to family practice. If people aren't in that type of position, it's hard to see both sides most times. But my thing is, how can law enforcement actually, I wonder if this is continued down here. Let me see. But yeah, how does law enforcement actually do that? And can they afford to do that? Because I don't think so. That seems very expensive to prosecute all those cases. And there's actual people who probably do need to be criminally charged. I hope she gets unsupervised probation and some community service. That's the most she should receive. It was an error due to negligence, didn't follow protocol, and for many reasons. So those are things you can write into the judge about also and say, hey, this is what we would like to, please be lenient with the sentence. This is why. We're hoping to set a precedent for system change. The prosecution, which was the people charging her, did not know about just culture, which is the thing where you report the system and like that's what the science backs up is like, hey, reporting it to the system is what works. Saying that they literally, their expert nurse witness did not know what just culture was. They asked her and she was like, no, I don't know what that is. So that's not helpful that they didn't know that. In another case of wrong leg amputation, Nurse Scott says both legs were diseased and they wanted to wait on one and then take the other. And then the other leg was mistakenly, but it probably was probably coming off later. Okay, so that's not like okay, but that is a little bit better. The other one wasn't just like totally fine. Let me see. Okay. MD. Nurse Scott says, but MDs, PAs, and nurses anyone who is reckless should be prosecuted. But how do we define reckless? You know what I mean? And that is my concern with that one is how do we say reckless? Because an error can almost always be seen as reckless. And a lot of the times, like there's so many different things that come into it that how do we know if where's the line of reckless versus a civil case, which is just, was there harm? Like, did something bad happen? Yes or no, versus criminal, which is how would we draw this line of like reckless versus like it's not reckless, it's a fine mistake versus a reckless mistake? That would make me nervous. If this became the standard, that would make me really nervous because I don't know how you would draw that line. And it would kind of depend on the jury and whoever was prosecuting it to decide, was my mistake something that others would deem as reckless or just as acceptable? And then that brings into the whole thing of like, none of it's acceptable. So it's kind of a mess. All right, friends, I think I so appreciate Mira. I just interviewed Mira today. So if you guys are ever interested, I do that whole healthcare series. This is a little ADHD moment. I do the whole healthcare series where we talk about different careers. And I got to interview Mira today, and she has a really cool story about like PA school. Basically, she's had a ton of really good experiences. She brings a ton of really interesting, like a really great background to the application process. And she's super passionate about bringing change within healthcare. And so she's going to go and save the world one day, but her interview will be coming up in a few weeks and you should all go watch it. Very fascinating. I learned a lot of things about the PA school application process. Even if you're not planning on applying to PA school, I think it would be a lovely watch for you. Fun Size Journey says, I can promise you if an MD, PA, and NP got DUI and killed a pedestrian, the NP would lose their license first. Yeah. Let me see. All right. I think we're going to wrap up. I was trying to keep these a little shorter. I told my sister, that I would keep this at an hour and 15 minutes, and we're at an hour and 20. Okay. So we have to wrap this up. I appreciate all of you for joining this conversation. You are truly some wonderful humans, and I appreciate you. I appreciate everybody keeping it respectful. I hope that you took away I will timestamp this in case you want to go back if you're catching this now or on the replay and you want to look and see what some practical steps are that you could take in order to make your practice safer, and make just everything a little bit more, your practice safer, your patient safer. For people like Amber, is it worth being a nurse anymore? Ready to quit nursing school? I think there's still good things about being a nurse, but it's also okay to recognize that maybe you didn't know about all these things and this is a deal breaker for you and you want to change your mind. I think that's totally fine. There are lots of different avenues within nursing. Not everyone is at the bedside. So just explore your options. If you're almost done, I would say graduate and then see what else you can do with your nursing license if you decide the bedside is not for you, because there are so many different jobs you can do within nursing, and it's always okay to change your mind. So remember, you are always, always, always allowed to change your mind. Okay. Again, thanks for hanging out. Keep me posted if there's anything else you guys want me to cover that's more on like the up and coming topics thing. I've been really enjoying being able to like cover these and kind of break them down in an understandable way. And yeah, subscribe if you made it this far and you're brand new. Welcome. There's going to be a video coming out later in the week talking about like channel updates type things. I just started like a channel membership thing. So I'm going to talk about what you get if you sign up for that. Basically, it's just like some extra goodies and an extra way to support me so that I can pay my sister because she wants to get paid still. She's very demanding about that. And yeah, we'll have like extra Q&As. There will be a whole video explaining it. But I think there should be a button to do that now. But I appreciate everyone who is here as always. And I hope you have a lovely evening. And maybe we can continue this conversation another time or dive into the next thing that pops up, because there always seems to be more nursing things popping up, and yay. All right, friends, have a beautiful evening. I'm really glad my power stayed on. I'm going to end this endless goodbye. Bye.